All right, welcome back, everyone. And we're going to get started with our next lecture here called The Birth of Modern. I got a little baby back then. Hi. Okay, thank you. I'm Napoleon now. Are you crowning me Napoleon? Yay, I'm Napoleon. All right, say bye bye, Eve.
Bye.
Bye.
I want to take that.
All right. She wanted to be in the lecture. All right, so we're going to start our next topic here, the birth of modern Italy and Germany. All right, and this is a very important lecture, and what we're going to get into is continuation of the 19th century. So before the midterm, we had talked about the Industrial Revolution, we had talked about the Progressive years. Now we're in the 19th century, continuing on, and we're looking at a couple other important events. But this is one of the more important lectures that students don't know a lot about, right? So it's the birth of modern Italy, modern Germany. And what I mean by that is when Italy becomes Italy and Germany becomes Germany. Sometimes I call it the unification of Italy or unification of Germany. And then the other important point before we go any further is this is also where your quiz 2 material will start from. So your next quiz, it's on your syllabus, right? Make sure you're following your syllabus. Is going to start from lectures from from quiz questions from this particular lecture. And then another reminder, just as we're doing reminders here, if you haven't started to read 1984, you need to start doing that. 1984 will not be on quiz 2, but you will have a discussion board on it. So a pretty important one, actually. So make sure you're doing that as well. All right, so the story of the unification of Italy and Germany, where do we start from? Well, it's an event that happens in the 1800s, but I don't want to start from the 1800s. I actually want to start from about 1990. Why 1990? Well, around 1990, a big wall came tumbling down. No ordinary wall. Of course, a lot of civilizations built walls. Most civilizations build walls to keep people out. This was a civilization that built walls to keep people in. And of course, what we're talking about is the very infamous Berlin Wall. And so around 1990, it was the end of the Cold War, and the Berlin Wall fell down, and people were happy and celebrating. David Hasselhoff went to sing there. For some reason, they really like him there. Don't ask me why. And so people were celebrating, and everybody was happy. Well, not everybody. On the surface, it seemed like it was a great day. You know, it was the end of communism, this horrible ideology that gripped Eastern Europe, and people were like, people are free, it's great, it's good. But there were some people who were upset. And what I'm talking about are not the communists. Who was upset? Well, some people who studied history. And the reason they were worried, maybe worried is a better word than upset, is because the last times we had a unified Germany, we had world wars, right? After the 1800s unification of Germany, we're going to have World War One. After Germany rebuilds itself between World War One and World War Two, we get World War Two. And so there were some individuals who were very worried that a unified Germany is a serious threat to Western civilization. And people go, well, it's not the same because those Germanys were ruled under dictators, and this is a democratic Germany, and that's true. But one thing we should always know about European history is things change, and they change very dramatically and sometimes very quickly. And just because a government is one form now doesn't mean it won't change as we go through the years. So it's something important to keep in mind. Why are they so worried about unified Germany? Well, we'll explain that towards the end of our lectures on this story here. So let's go to our maps. And let me just kind of set everything up now. So what are we doing in this lecture? So here you see a map of Italy and a map of what will be Germany. And Italy was fragmented into a bunch of parts. Every one of these borders is an independent Italian-speaking area. And all these areas here, all the different colors are basically German-speaking areas. And so in the 1800s, Italy will unite and Germany will unite. They're not uniting with each other, just to be clear. So in this lecture, there's basically three things you need to know. Number one, the causes. Why does it happen? What are the causes? What are the motivations? Why now? Why in the mid 1800s does this happen? That's number one. Number two, after we talk about the causes, we need to talk about the process. And the process involves a lot of names of a lot of people. Like I said, these are some of the most important people just a lot of students never even heard of before, but they're really important. You will need to know them. There'll be a good chunk of quiz number two. And then the impacts. Why do we care? And then I'll kind of tie it in with the story I was just mentioning about the fall of the Berlin Wall. So we'll kind of get into all of that in these lectures. I may end up breaking this up into two separate YouTube videos only because it may be a little long. You could do it in one lecture. In class, I do this all in one lecture day. But because it sometimes takes, big files take longer to upload on YouTube and all that, I might break it up into part one, part two. So we'll just see how long this goes. All right, so anyways, so this is, our maps. We'll explain these maps. I'm going to come back to these maps several times as we go through the lecture. But let's start by looking at the causes. So that's what we need to talk about first. So we're going to get the causes, the process, and the impacts. I'm also going to give you a chart that kind of has a nice little review chart for you, a blank chart you can fill out to help you take your notes and review it. So look for that as well. I'm also going to eventually, I don't think this week, but pretty soon give you the review sheet for the final as well. So you've got a lot of stuff coming up as we move to the second half of the semester. All right, so let's talk about the causes of the unification of Italy and Germany. And the causes are essentially the same. The reasons Italy unifies and the reason Germany unifies are very similar. So we're going to do kind of the causes all together. Then I'll talk about the process of the unification of Italy. Then we'll do a separate part on the process of the unification of Germany. And then we'll get to the impacts. So the causes. The first cause is nationalism. So this is something we did talk about before the midterm. While your quiz and your finals and everything we covered the second half of the semester only, there are some ideas that go back from the first part of the semester, which you will need to know. This is one of them. Nationalism, and I'm not going to, I didn't type it all up again, but you should have it in your notes. Nationalism is the state of mind rising out of an awareness of being part of a community that has common language, culture, traditions, and customs. And so what we see in this time period is that nationalism is saying if Italy is fragmented, well, there should be one Italy. And if Germany is fragmented, there should be one Germany. So nationalism was a very big part. When we talk about the process, I'm going to come back to this. But that was a key motivation. That's one. There's essentially three big causes. This is nationalism is one of them. The second cause is a little bit more complicated, and it's going to seem at first I'm going off on this tangent, but it's all going to come together and make sense. So while at first I'm going to be talking about France, what does France have anything to do with the unification of Italy and Germany? I'm going to explain that, but I need to give you a little bit of some French history, and then as we talk about what's going on in France in the 1800s, you'll eventually see the connection. So just give it a few minutes as you listen to it all. In the meantime, just, all these words, jot them down, take notes as we talk about them. So I'm going to stay on this chart here of the words for a while before I move over, so you don't have to worry about jotting everything down right away. All right, so what happens in France? And again, how is this going to connect with the unification of Italy and Germany? So Louis XVIII, right? If you remember, after Napoleon is vanquished, the Battle of Waterloo, 1815, Louis XVIII takes over. Bourbon family comes back in. He rules from 1850 to 1830, rules essentially as a constitutional monarch, doesn't overexert his authority too much. He's not too popular. He is from that family line that they beheaded the previous Louis, remember, but things go relatively smoothly. 1830, he dies. When he dies, he's going to be replaced by his brother, a man named Charles X, who's a bit older. And Charles X in 1830 becomes the new monarch of France. And immediately he institutes what are called the July Ordinances of 1830. What are these July Ordinances? Well, these July Ordinances are specific ideas of Charles X. What kind of ideas? Well, let me lay them out for you, a few of them. Increasing censorship in France, that's one. A second part of the July Ordinances is limiting the rights of people to vote in France. And a third part of the July Ordinances was dissolving the Legislative Assembly in France. So there was a Legislative Assembly again under the reign of Louis XVIII, and that goes bye-bye. So I think you can kind of see where this is going. What is Charles X trying to do? Charles X is trying to restore absolutism. Obviously, the people in France already don't like the family line. They don't want any sort of absolutism, especially under Charles X. And what do we get in 1830 is the July Revolution. So there is actually more than one French Revolution. People only know, but usually know, oh, the French Revolution, there's more than one. And not a surprise, the people rebel, they get rid of Charles. It's not as bloody and crazy as the previous revolution because Charles just hightails it out of there. He flees, he sees he's not liked. what do the people in France do? They end up selecting a new man to be their king, a man named Louis Philippe, who will be king from 1830 to 1848. He is sometimes known as the Citizen King because he doesn't overexert his authority. He dresses like the middle class. He kind of understands, he's a relative of the family. He's not the son, I forget, I think he was a cousin. And so he continues to rule in a somewhat, tempered manner, right? And all is going relatively smoothly between 1830 and 1848. So that part's fine. The issue is what he doesn't do well. And what he doesn't do well is he's not modernizing France well. He's not industrializing France well. Remember, this is during the Industrial Revolution. England is industrializing, and France is kind of falling a little bit behind. And unemployment was going up pretty high. In fact, by 1848, about 1/3 of the population of France was unemployed. That's bad. I mean, guys, during a good economic time, unemployment is about 4 or 5%. If you have, when COVID hit, we literally shut down a country, right? Unemployment got up to like what, 15% roughly, and that was because of a once in a century pandemic that obviously no one could have any control of once it spread out of China and went global. And so, this is just because things were not going well. And so that's bad. That's really bad. And people are upset. And what does this lead to in 1848? Another uprising, another essentially revolution, what we call the June Days of 1848. But this time, the people in France in 1848 say, you know what? We don't want another king. We're done with the kings. We don't want another king. We want a president. And so in 1848, Louis Philippe forced to abdicate, and there's going to be an election. And the question is, who do the people in France elect in 1848? Well, you're going to love this. Who do they elect in 1848? A man named Napoleon. There he is. He's back. No, different Napoleon. I don't know if you guys knew this, but there was another Napoleon. This is his nephew. And from 1848 to 1852, Napoleon will be the elected president of France. Why does he become the one elected? Well, duh, his name, Napoleon. Remember, they loved the previous Napoleon, even though he lost and got kicked out and all that. He was still very popular, and so his nephew is very popular. He's got good name recognition, and so Napoleon becomes this president of France. And what does he do between 1848 and 1852 as president? A lot. He grants universal male suffrage. What does that mean? It means every male is allowed to vote, rich or poor. That makes him popular with people. He builds railroads in France. Remember when we did the lecture on the Industrial Revolution? He just massive increases the railroads. Industry grows dramatically. Paris, the city of Paris, he just makes into a magnificent city. This is sometimes where Paris is known as the city of lights because he creates these lampposts everywhere. He's going to, create a lot of widening the streets, new modern buildings. He's industrializing France. He's also making sure like the progressive years are happening. And what I mean by that is the same time as the Industrial Revolution, he's making sure people's wages are going up, that the cities are clean. So long story short, Napoleon between 1848 and 1852 is already very popular. So in 1852, this is where the story gets a little more interesting. Napoleon then goes and says, I want to have a new title. I want to be emperor. And he says, I'm going to put it to the vote of the people. Do you want me to be emperor? And what do they say? Well, once again, we want you to be emperor. And in 1852, Napoleon becomes Napoleon III, emperor. And he's going to be emperor until 1870. And so he's emperor for a long period of time. And he's doing this and he's very popular. Now, about 1860s, there were some people in France who went to Napoleon and say, hey, Napoleon, we like what you're doing. Things are good. But this whole emperor thing, do you think you can kind of give up some of your power, some of your authority? It's already the mid 1860s and all of that. And what does Napoleon tell them? Yes, yes, I will give up some of my authority. which probably is not the answer you're expecting, because how many times in history is somebody popular, has a lot of authority, and willingly gives it up? It doesn't happen too often. This is like, of course, the great George Washington, and other individuals like that in history are rare, and Napoleon did. Why is that important? Well, what don't you have in the 1850s then, or 1860s? You don't have a revolution. You don't have another uprising. Instead, under Napoleon III, France continues to become strong and dominant. So you need to know all that, right? You need to know what happened under Louis XVIII and Charles X and all the way Louis Philippe and Napoleon III. Then the question is, what does all of that have to do with why Italy and Germany unify? Well, let me go to my map, and I think this will become pretty important, is an understanding why the events in France play a very big motivation to the unification of Italy and Germany. So here's just another map, and again, there's no Italy. Remember, there is no Germany. This is an earlier map that we used during the Napoleonic period, but it works. So if you are living in these areas, let's process this a bit. It's the mid 1800s. Let's say 1850 for round numbers, right? And you know, England is a very powerful nation industrializing. Now you have Austria, they're pretty strong. Russia's got some problems, but Russia is always big and powerful. Now France has just really modernized well under Napoleon III. They're modernizing, they're getting strong, and there's a guy named Napoleon in charge. Now, guys, the last time a guy named Napoleon was in charge of France and started to build things up, in half a decade, he basically ran through all of Europe. And if you're living in these Italian states or German states, you may be thinking, this is another superpower, as I say, in Europe. And if we don't find a way to unify and become strong ourselves, how long is it until a France, an England, a Russia, an Austria might come under, knock on our borders and do some damage? And so this is why it's kind of a bit of a roundabout way of explaining it, but I needed to do that to have you have the full picture. But this is the motivational factor that's going to help the unification of Italy and Germany take place. All right, so I hope that's clear. All of that is under Napoleon III specifically. So the first cause is nationalism. The second cause is events in France. There's a third cause that's also going to serve the motivation for the unification of Italy and Germany, and it has to do with a war. Maybe some of you have heard of it before, the Crimean War. So I don't know how familiar you are with the Crimean War. It's about 1854 to 1856. It's not a very long war, about 2.5 years or so. We call it the Crimean War because it's in the Crimean Peninsula. If you don't know where that is, Black Sea, right? Russia is up here. And in the 1800s, what you had is the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire down here, the Ottoman Empire, this whole area down there. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Ottoman Empire, in my Middle East class, I spend weeks on the Ottoman Empire. I teach that course every spring semester. And if anybody's interested in the history of the Middle East, that is a darn good class to take. We cover a lot of information on that. But the Ottoman Empire was dominant all the way in the 1300s, 1400s, 1500s, 1600s, 1700s. But by the 1800s, the Ottoman Empire was becoming weak. And as the Ottoman Empire was becoming weak, Russia, England, France kind of smelled blood. Russia especially, they went after the Ottoman Empire trying to pick up some pieces from it, especially around the Black Sea. And so the Crimean War is fought. And what does this have to do anything with the unification of Italy and Germany? Well, Russia is involved in this war. England and France come into this war, not so much to help the Ottoman Empire, but they don't want Russia to get too strong and dominate the Black Sea. Why does this matter? Well, remember before the midterm, again, one of these other ideas before the midterm that you do need to know, that concert of Europe. And that concert of Europe where there was harmony in Europe. And I said, can you think of wars in the 19th century? And you really couldn't think of too many probably off the top of your heads. Well, this is one of them. And what the concert of Europe we thought was this harmony. What the Crimean War shows us, it's a few sour notes in this concert of Europe. That if an Ottoman Empire that's been around for centuries is now being picked apart by these European powers, then what's to keep a bunch of independent Italian states from being attacked, or a bunch of independent German states from being attacked? And so this would, again, just like the events in France, just like nationalism, maybe some sort of motivational factor to have this unification take place. So I think kind of the Crimean War is key to some of that as well. All right, so I hope that's clear. So here's again our map of Europe. And what we need to begin to talk about now is the process. So we've got the causes down. And again, this map also kind of shows us, it's kind of a close-up map. But here's again Russia. Here's that Ottoman Empire I was talking about. Crimean War, kind of in this whole area around the Black Sea region, just kind of an overview map of it. But our focus, of course, is again the unification of Italy and Germany. So now we need to know the process. Why does Italy unify? Or how does Italy unify and how does Germany unify? And then the impact. So I think what we'll do is we'll kind of pause here so it won't be too big of a file to upload, and then we'll continue on in the next segment on the unification process itself, talk about all the key people involved in Italy and then in Germany. All right, thank you guys.